Welcome to our discussion in this week from Agnew's Pressured into Crime, chapters 2, 3, and 4. So first we ask, what is strain? Well, it's a negative experience or relationship that really creates pressure towards deviance. It arises, as it says, when individuals are prevented from achieving goals or experience harmful treatment. Agnew expanded on classical strain theory beyond Merton's blocked goal. He said that strain includes a loss of valued stimuli and a presentation of negative stimuli. For juveniles, strains may stem from family conflict, academic failure, or peer rejection, and this strain leads to negative emotions that include anger and frustration that can lead to delinquency. Agnew talks about the three major types of strain, and they are failure to achieve positively valued goals, removal of positively valued stimuli, and the presentation of negative stimuli. He argues that strain covers external barriers and personal experiences. The emotional meaning of the strain matters more than the event itself. He includes two different types, and they are subjective and objective, where the objective strain are events that most people will find stressful, and the subjective is more on how the individual, what they find as stressful, and it really perceives and interprets those events. Two juveniles may face the same experience, but react differently depending on their coping skills and perception of the events. Perception is central to predicting delinquency. He continues talking about the types and sources of strain. And the common sources are parental rejection or neglect, harsh and inconsistent discipline. Not discipline, but where it's inconsistent and overly harsh for what the event occurred. Academic failure, peer abuse or bullying, criminal victimization, and economic deprivation. Juvenile strain often begins in family and school. Persistent or severe strain increases the likelihood of delinquent coping. So let's look at the strains that are most likely that will lead to crime. And those are that strains that are high in magnitude or severity. They're perceived by the person as unjust. They're associated with low social control, and they create pressure for criminal coping. Not all strain leads to crime. Youth who view situations as unfair and lack coping outlets are at the greatest risk. Anger and frustration play a huge role in emotion and with strain. So strain leads to negative emotion that leads to committing a crime as a coping mechanism. Anger energizes and lowers the inhibition against crime. Also, individuals can feel fear or depression, and this can lead to drug use or withdrawal. Agnew describes anger as the engine that drives strain to delinquency. Low self-control or deviant peers can heighten this effect. And Agnew talks about the coping strategies for strain. There are cognitive coping, where an individual redefines the situation or the event. Now there's behavioral coping, and this takes legal action to really fix the problem. He also talks about emotional coping strategies, something like venting out your frustrations, talking to someone, exercise. Delinquency is one coping response among many. Prosocial coping is more likely when youth have resources and emotional regulation skills. So as we've talked about, individuals cope with these strains differently. So let's look at why some of them, many of them, cope with illegal means. They have a lack of coping skills or legitimate outlets. They might have low social support and weak bonds. And this connects GST here with social learning and control theories. The weak bonds in antisocial models can increase deviant coping. And we see this in those theories I just mentioned, along with skill of exposure to deviant peers that we see in differential association, the high impulsivity or low self-control that we just talked about with control theories, as well as learned antisocial values. And this also connects to learning theory. So this moves us to talking about conditioning factors. Not all adolescents who are exposed to crime offend, and we know this. Supportive adults and constructive activities can buffer the effects of strain. And these are conditioned by the personality traits of the individuals and their peers, the social support systems that we see that don't include just parents, but include peers and schools, as well as cultural environment. We know that environment, what we talked about a couple weeks ago, really can impact offending and can impact juveniles especially. And general strain theory suggests that prevention must reduce strain and improve resilience, not really solely on punishment. And we can do this by strengthening the coping resources for at-risk youth. We can reduce chronic strain, such as violence and poverty. And we can encourage mentoring and pro-social peers, as well as look for trauma-informed programs that individuals can participate in and really learn those coping skills to prevent them from relying on illegal means to cope with their strains. So let's summarize what we have just talked about in this, or what I have talked about in this presentation. Agnew's general strain theory integrates environment, emotion, and opportunity to explain why some youth turn to crime under strain. That strain stems from blocked goals, loss, or negative experiences. Emotions mediate the path from strain to crime. Coping with the strains determines the outcomes. And prevention addresses both structural and personal sources of pressure.